Good afternoon, and welcome to the TalentReach hosted virtual event, Beyond the Hashtag, Sustainable Action for Equality and Diversity in Hiring. My name is David Olmos, and I am with Badon Hill Group, a marketing agency that makes big business marketing available for everyone. I'll be your facilitator today. Here are some tips for the best experience. The quality of the webinar is only as good as the worst connection between you and our presenters. Most connection issues can be resolved by exiting the webinar and rejoining the webinar. I would also like to remind you this webinar is being recorded and you will be available on demand later this week. We'll be taking your questions for our panelists for a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. You can submit your questions in the group chat or via email at webinar.questions@badonhillgroup.com. That again is webinar.questions@badonhillgroup.com. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Amanda Gorlick of TalentReach.
Thanks, David. TalentReach is so happy to have you all join us today. This topic has always been an initiative and a pillar to our business that we support, especially given the current state. I wanted to quickly introduce TalentReach in case you're not familiar with our company. We're a talent agency that supports local businesses in the technology and sales space for recruiting. This is our third installment of our webinar series that we are dedicated to addressing relevant topics in our community, and we hope you enjoy the content today and look forward to your feedback. With that, I will give the ball back to David as he will introduce the next portion.
Thank you for that, Amanda. As an introduction, we have prepared a video for you, Equality in America, the Challenge of a Generation. Presenters, if you could please mute. And after this 4-minute video, we'll hand it off to Jen for our panel discussion. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on July 2nd of the same year. The act outlaws discrimination based on race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. It also prohibits racial segregation in schools and employment. Just how far have we come in 56 years? The improvements since 1964 are undeniable. However, the inequality Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, called BIPOC, remain part of the American fabric. The challenges we face as a nation extend beyond the boardroom and include the classroom and the courtroom. According to the Brookings Institute, white American households have a mean net worth of $171,000, compared to just $17,150 for Black families. This disparity cannot be explained away by income, indebtedness, or educational attainment. When a BIPOC child enters preschool, they are behind their white peers in language and math development, with Blacks even further behind. Preschool programs shrink this gap by the time the students reach the first grade, but those gains evaporate during primary education. By high school graduation, non-whites are 2 grades behind their peers in equivalency testing. Black graduates, 2.5 grades behind. The challenges go beyond equivalency in education. A K-12 Black student is 380% more likely to receive a school suspension, and a gifted Black student is 54% less likely to be recommended to a gifted, talented program. When it comes to high school graduation, success also sees a significant gap. 91% of whites graduate high school, compared to 86% of Blacks, but just 66% of Hispanics and 65% of Indigenous Americans. In the courtroom, BIPOC populations face similar discrimination. 35% of juveniles arrested are Black, despite making up only 15% of the youth population. Data collected since 2015 indicates a Black suspect is twice as likely to be killed by police versus a white suspect. 56% of those serving life sentences in the U.S. prison system, the largest in the world, are Black. The United States judicial system is overwhelmed, with 80% of cases ending in a plea deal and never even going to trial. Between socioeconomic, educational, and judicial disparity, the college and career level impacts is dramatic. 72% of white students that complete high school goes on to an undergraduate program, compared to 44% of black students and 50% of Hispanic students. While 59% of white students who attend college go on to graduate, only 43% of black women and 35% of black men do. And that disparity is maintained even among the elite universities. By the time a BIPOC American reaches the workforce, they have a higher chance of having a criminal record. They are 2 grade levels behind their classroom peers and face a lifetime of reduced opportunity. These issues combine to prevent the building of generational wealth, and the cycle repeats. Hashtags of Black Lives Matter, marketing campaigns, and one-time donations won't change these systemic problems. Unweaving these threads from our fabric will require a generational effort. If we bring true equality to American society, everyone will benefit through less crime, higher GDP, better health, better productivity, and a better standard of living for all. This is the challenge of a generation. I'd like to remind our panelists to unmute at this time, and now let me introduce you to Jen Mueller.
Thank you, David. You could see that there were some big numbers in there and understand that there is some disparity that is leading to the conversation that we are having today. I am thrilled to be with you. My name is Jen Mueller. I am a sports broadcaster. I am also a business owner and somebody who engages in conversations for a living. And this is an important conversation that we are engaging in today. It is a big topic, and we are not going to solve all of the problems on this issue, but what we can do in the next hour is lean on experts, hear their insights, and discover 1 or 2 things that you can do right now to move the needle in becoming more diverse in your hiring practices, specifically as it relates to the BIPOC community. The flow of the conversation is going to look like this. We'll start with why the conversation is important, barriers that get in the way, steps needed to put ideas into practice, things that you can consider, evaluate, or do differently in the recruiting and hiring process. I'll guide the conversation with the panelists for the first 45 minutes, then we'll open it up for audience questions. You can submit those questions in the chat. I'll monitor that. I might throw 1 or 2 into the conversation we're having with the panelists, but just know that the bulk of those questions we will try to get to in the Q&A section. And with that, let's introduce our panelists today, starting with Amelia Ransom. She is the Senior Director of Engagement and Diversity at Avalara. Amelia has over 30 years of experience building and executing strategy with human resources and business operations. Her areas of expertise include leadership development, employee engagement, executive level mentorship and advisement, and diversity and inclusion strategy and execution. She also serves on a number of boards and is deeply involved in community advocacy. Kapir Shahani is the CEO at Imperity and a technology entrepreneur and senior executive with experiences at many stages of the life cycle. He co-founded Imperity in January 2016 with the vision of using data and software to unleash the potential of marketers and analysts at the world's most admired consumer brands. Aaron Hurst is the foremost expert on the science of purpose and fulfillment at work. In 2014, he brought global awareness to the rise of the 4th economic era in history, the purpose economy. He is the CEO and co-founder of Imperative, the platform that connects and supports employees as peer career coaches. And rounding out our panelists today, Shelmina Abji, a former vice president at IBM and a current board member of Girl Up, a global leadership development initiative positioning girls to be leaders in the movement for gender equality. Shelmina is dedicated to fixing the leaky leadership pipeline of women and other underrepresented minorities. As a sought-after global keynote speaker, she has energized, inspired, and guided thousands of career women to accelerate their success. Her passion and focus on women's empowerment is another element of the BIPOC diversity conversation. Now, just by way of getting to know each other a little bit before we dive into the heavy conversation, it's a getting to know you question. And for the audience, I want you to think about what your answers will be. Now, I happened to read an article that was posted in the Washington Post last week that said that sales of gum and candy have plunged dramatically in Q2 compared to last year at the same time. It is about 33% down for the company that makes Trident gum, because of course it is an impulse buy at checkout. So here's the question our panelists are going to get us started with today. What's the item you have practically stopped buying during the pandemic? And what's the item you purchase a surprising amount of right now? Aaron, I'm going to have you start the conversation off. What do you got for me?
Happy to. So I was a fervent reader of books beforehand and I probably read about a book a week. I don't think I've read a single book since the pandemic started. I'm just so focused on like what's currently happening that anything that's like been published feels out of date. So I've just upped my purchasing of like paid quality sort of current subscriptions to content.
Interesting, because I've actually had time to read a couple of books. So we're on the opposite ends of that spectrum. Shelmina, how about you?
So, I'm a spa junkie. I thought that I needed a massage a week, and I haven't had one for 3 months and I'm still living. So stopped buying massages and I started buying hair color. I have always gone to a salon to get my hair colored. I now do it at home. Something else I thought I couldn't do, doing it now.
How about that? I know that root cover-up becomes very handy, at least at my house. Kabir, I'm guessing that you don't have the same answers. What is it for you?
I don't. Mine might be obvious. We're pretty avid travelers, both personally and professionally, and airline ticket purchases have gone squarely to zero, although I'm spending more time in my car getting around the Seattle area and doing some weekend trips, which has been fun. And surprisingly, maybe not given the statistics that we've seen, but the wine consumption in our house has gone up quite a bit. We typically are not weekday wine drinkers, but the pandemic has changed that a little bit.
Thank you for making me feel better and less judged, Kabir. I really appreciate that. Amelia, how about you?
I love these answers. I would say the thing that I have bought the least amount of since COVID is gasoline. From end of February to July, I did not fill my gas tank one time. So that was a long time for me. And the thing, I'm not sure I'm buying more of this because of COVID or if I'm just aware of how much of it I buy all the time, is artwork. So I'm a little bit obsessed. I feel like you can find art. You can find places to put all the artwork. Don't worry about where you're going to put it. Just buy it and then figure it out. So that's become painfully clear to me that I maybe have gone too far on that side.
My husband is no longer buying the argument that I can find a place to put the art.
Exactly. I'm in the same struggle.
Well, while those questions look like it was just a fun way to get to know the panelists, and it was, what it actually shows is that our habits have changed over the last 4 to 6 months. And that helps us get into the conversation about diversity and equity, because our habits need to change. It's not enough just to have conversations or to have a hashtag that helps to market and promote the thoughts. We need to have more actions. And Amelia, I want to start with you and then get to Shelmina. What is the business case to be made for diversity? And what are the most powerful numbers that you have found?
Well, I'm going to do a thing that if my mother were here, she'd be very disappointed in me. And I'm going to answer a question with a question, which is, what is the business case for homogeneity? Is there a business case for sameness? And I don't think so. So yes, I think most things should have business cases, but I also think we spend a lot of time leveraging diversity and inclusion professionals and other professionals to always come up with the business case. The business case is all around you. Look at Earth. There is your business case. If you want to be the best company in the world and everybody says they want top talent. I want top talent, I want top talent. Well, top talent sometimes has a name you can't pronounce or breastfeeds or wears a hijab or whatever. So that's the business case. And so again, apologies to my mother for that. But the numbers that I have seen that really get to this are actually a recent article that I read that included a study that in April said about 4% of employees were thinking about leaving the workforce as a result of COVID. That number in July is now 27%. We know that that is going to impact women more than men. And so if you can't understand, if you're not working on how to make your business more inclusive, and in this example for gender-related issues, then you're going to lose out on talent. You're not going to have the best.
And I think that that dovetails nicely into Shelmina's expertise and passion. In your work around women's empowerment, Shelmina, what data do you come back to most often? And why is diversity of thought your overarching goal?
Thank you. So women's empowerment, I also talk about underrepresented minorities. So really, the case for diversity is very clear. And I will give you specific numbers. Diverse companies have 19% higher revenue, and this is reported by Boston Consulting Groups. Diverse companies are 1.7 times more likely to be innovation leaders in their market, according to Josh Bersin. Diverse companies are 70% more likely to capture a new market. And I really want you to pay attention to that, because that answers your second question. The question around diversity of thought. Just imagine having a problem and having the same like-minded people solving that problem. How will you solve that problem versus having a problem and having people from diverse backgrounds, different perspectives, different life journeys, different cultures, all being allowed to voice their opinion in an equal way to solve this problem? There will be so much more creativity, so much more innovation. And this is how you capture new markets. Because if you just keep doing the same thing you've been doing with the same number of people and the same kind of people, we're gonna not go anywhere. So really, there is a business case for diversity, and people need to recognize that this is not some kind of a favor you're doing to diverse people. This is not some kind of corporate social responsibility we're talking about. This is about diversity actually adding value to your business and adding to the economy and the world GDP. So we're not doing anyone any favors here, guys. By hiring people with diverse backgrounds, you are improving your business.
Kabir, how have you seen diversity yield the best results?
You know, I really appreciate the points both Amelia and Shelmina made. I think they're right on. You know, and for us, I think the results show up in a bunch of different places. One, they show up in how you interact with your customers and demonstrating to your customers your values. And I think values-based businesses in general are becoming more the norm than they are the exception. And I believe values-based businesses will lead in markets, you know, of varying sectors. The second, I would say the more important area where we see it show up in results is in employee satisfaction and happiness and tenure. I think when you demonstrate to your organization and your number one customer really being your team, I know everybody here probably works in a people function or is interested in a people function of some kind. It allows you to attract the best talent. Because people want to work for an organization that cares about these issues. I know we'll probably talk more about it, but I have been floored, like completely stunned by the receptivity and the engagement by the folks at Amperity around the Black Lives Matter movement, around just what's happened over the last several months and the level of awareness, the level of engagement. I mean, this is a generation that cares so much more than any previous generation in the workforce. And I think it's really important that when you put that level of intentionality into how you build the business and how you hire, it allows you to have the best team, which allows you to have the best results.
And so having said all of this, it seems like this is obvious and that we should have made more than just incremental change in this arena and in this conversation, Aaron, why haven't we seen anything else happen?
I mean, to start with, it's hard. I think this is a topic which we've been talking about for a long time, and it is a hard one, and every solution has, challenges around it. At the core, I think a lot of it is looking at it historically and at a societal level and just realizing how much the current systems are actually built to make this as hard as possible. We have systems that reward short-term benefit. So, Amelia, I loved your point about like, what is the actual value of homogeneity? Great question, but like if I just need to fill one hire on my team and like I need to hit my sales number and I've got a solid white candidate like right at that moment, and I got to hit that from an efficiency standpoint because I got to hit the thing, like there's pressure to do that. You look at like these pressures that are there, and then you just have like, there's so much systemic racism in our country. And I think it's something that, I'm processing. We'll talk more about it myself. I mean, my dad, I was talking to him a couple of weeks ago and he's like, you know what, I finally realized I'm racist, he told me. And I was like, wow, like that's amazing. And it led to a great conversation, helped me realize also just how much I still hold so much of that part of our culture. And it's not something HR and psychology and then legal don't like to talk to each other. And the answer to a lot of this ties to psychology. And yet psychology, like a therapist and a lawyer do not get in the same room because one's about vulnerability and one's about keeping your mouth shut. And they're not going to solve the problem as long as it's up to sort of just lawyers to address it, among 1,000 other things.
But you know what? But that's a really important point to make about how these conversations need to go across different industries, professions, places in your organization, right? It can't just happen within your own group. And the part of the conversation, Amelia, that we don't get to most often is this underlying current that I think comes back to who we know. What should we be talking about more in this conversation?
Well, when you talk about who you know, I mean, to Aaron's point, most of us probably on this webinar right now are not going to get our next jobs because we just filled out an application and wait for somebody to call us back. We're going to get networked into it. Aaron's going to call me, Kabir's going to call me and say, hey, I heard about this great thing. You should talk to my friend so-and-so and so. So when we think about that, think about the 10 people who most influence you. What do those people look like? Are they diverse? There was a recent, the study isn't recent, I read it recently, it's from 2014, that says 75% of white people don't know a single person of color. So that means every person of color, if you think about me, I'm somebody's Black friend. I'm not just somebody's friend, I'm somebody's Black friend. I don't want to be somebody's Black friend. So the network has got to expand so that the way that we do it more people can come into the funnel. And the data tell us that more people, women and people of color, of course the doorbell would ring right now. Of course, why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't the FedEx delivery person show up right now? But that women and people of color are mostly hired based on results and men are hired based on potential. That's also got to change, right? Because you don't ever have an opportunity to prove something if you never have an opportunity to prove something. So that's what it comes, that underlying thing, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. To Aaron's point, the systems are built on this. The systems are built to reward the short-term reward, which Aaron mentioned, but it's also built to reward whiteness and maleness.
And recognizing that and acknowledging that is the first step that we need to make. I also want to point out that we've got about 20 to 25 minutes before we open this up for audience Q&A. So if you've got some questions that are coming up, please put them into the chat. We will work them into the conversation. Kabir, I'm going to get to you in just a minute about the work that Imperity is doing to counter what Amelia was just talking about. But first, Shelmina, how do you advise people to expand their network, and why is it important to get proactively uncomfortable?
So I first of all love what Amelia just said, and I see this everywhere. I also want to go back to what Aaron said. This is this efficiency mindset, and it's not just that efficiency mindset. We are at our hectic pace. Everyone today has more to do than they have hours in the day, right? And so at our hectic pace, we tend to run on autopilot. We don't stop and say, what is my best response? And knowing that, we must then be in a position where if we have to make a quick decision, we have the network available. We've already done the homework to make sure that our funnel, as salespeople will say, I identify my opportunities by casting a wider net instead of going to the few customers that I already know. And this is hard work. I don't believe anyone wakes up in the morning and says, how do I just hire people that look like me? I really believe that people are good. They have good intentions. They want to do the right thing, but they have time pressure. They have to get something done. And if they haven't really done the work prior to when they need to get something done, then they will keep doing what is easiest for them to do. So I say, get uncomfortable. Don't just have one Black friend and one Indian friend and one Latina friend, and just, go places where there are people of diversity, and knowing that this is a business imperative. By you going to those places, yes, it might be slightly uncomfortable because change is uncomfortable, but change is needed. And so you make the effort, you have the discipline, you persevere, and you keep expanding your network, not just as a token friend, but truly as casting your net wide.
And Erin, you had something to add to this conversation about being wired for efficiency. We've got to be aware of this, not just happening in our networks, but when we go to the hiring process, what is it that our brains tend to do when we look at candidates?
Yeah, I think, the way our brain works is that we look for patterns, right? That's why I'm a successful entrepreneur. I see patterns of needs out there and I come up with a solution and I build, a product for that. But, to the earlier point about, our personal networks, the majority of Black people that I've seen are on TV, and it hasn't always been a very flattering portrayal. And as a result of that, my pattern recognition, if I sort of lean on that as a default, which is the brain works, is not a positive one. So I have to very actively see that come through and say, I don't want to listen to that voice. I'm going to look at this human being, right? But it has to be a very active result, and we're not honest with ourselves. One of my favorite examples, there's a book called Dataclysm, which is actually about the data behind an online dating site. And they were just talking about, for example, the number of people who said they're open to dating people of other races was ridiculously high, 80, 90%. The percent of them then they looked and said, did they do it on the platform? It was 10%, right? That's where our behavior and our mind are not connected. And until we can sort of break that, we're not going to be able to sort of honestly, I think, interview people, honestly sort of assess talent.
And if we keep this all internal, there is no way to measure what's happening. Kabir, this is where we get back to the work that you're doing. How have you solved for this and made this a very public thing at Imperity?
Yeah, there's a couple things to this. And I just want to acknowledge for everybody that's attending today, not just, our great panelists, this is really hard. Like what Erin and Shelmina and Amelia have shared, and that intellectual honesty that's required is really hard. And I agree that there's the efficiency piece, there's the implicit bias piece, there's also the trust factor, like the networks that we are operating in. You tend in hiring specifically, you tend to lean on, I worked with them before. I know them. I trust that they're going to do a good job. I trust that they're going to represent our company well. And when you don't have the diversity in your own network, how we've ended up in this position, in the snowball effect. I can say, it is really hard for me to say this, that our level of diversity at Imperity is not nearly representative of our values or our ambition, and that's embarrassing. I'm an Indian, son of immigrants, quote unquote minority, and it's something I've always cared a lot about. And to see it not manifest in the organization has been this splash of cold water hitting my face. And so we've got sort of three big buckets that we're working on and we're being really aggressive about. The first is our community efforts, which has been part of who we are as a company. That I am super proud of. We have been a community-focused company in terms of from day one. We believe that business is one of the most powerful platforms for change, and we want to use that for change as we grow. The shift we've now made is we are focusing those community efforts around specific diversity and inclusion type efforts. And so, for example, we do an Imperative Day of Caring every year that the United Way organizes, and that's usually focused on the community and public works and things like that. This year, we're making sure that that's focused on diversity-related efforts and things that are related to diverse communities. We have also added, we're asking all of our team members to take 1 day per quarter off of work and focus on learning and dedicating that time to learning about implicit bias and spending time in the community and maybe communities that they haven't spent much time in, historically. The second big bucket is a bunch of other stuff we're doing in that I'll spare you all the detail on. Company culture is the other really kind of important part to this. And we're, I think in another week or two, we've got implicit bias training we're doing for the whole company, which I think is really important. And we're also ensuring that we leave time for reading groups and having our first dedicated diversity committee in the organization. So there's stuff culturally that we're doing that we've done in other examples. And then I think the most powerful one, and the one that is really metrics driven, is around our hiring practices. And so, we've committed, there's a whole list of things, and again, I'll spare you all the detail on it, but ensuring that for every open position, we are also interviewing at least one woman, one person of color, and or LGBTQ in that candidate pool. So being, really, really dedicated to that. And then we also, one thing I think we've done recently that was really powerful is we've implemented a blind process in terms of exercises. So we try to be pretty data driven in our hiring process. And so when we ask somebody to complete kind of a project or an exercise, we're doing that without the hiring manager being aware of who the candidate is. And so they can actually look at the output of the work and less, kind of what Aaron was talking about, the pattern recognition that people might have in their own minds. And I'll wrap all that by saying, we put it all out and we said, hey, we want the world to know what our commitments are and what our statistics are, because we want you to hold us accountable. I think this is, this is not new science, and Aaron, you can teach us more about this, but they say the fastest way to change habits, whether you want to lose weight or you want to, wake up earlier or whatever, is you talk about your commitments so people will hold you accountable and you have that self-management structure in place. And so you can go to our website, you can navigate to our blog, and you can see we've basically said, here's exactly by the numbers what we're going to be doing. And I certainly expect there will be many people, both in our own company and outside, that will hold us accountable to those commitments.
I love that, Kabir. And before we get to Aaron, I do want to point out, Amelia, when you start talking about culture and when you start talking about hiring people, it's not just making the hire that is diverse. You have to have a culture that supports that. Why is it helpful to think about ice cream? Because I know that this is a lesson that's going to stick the next time somebody goes to grab a bowl of ice cream.
There are some of my colleagues on here, and I know they're rolling their eyes like, she's going to tell that ice cream story one more time, and I sure am. So this is why it's like ice cream. I can go find you 31 flavors of ice cream today. In fact, there's a whole store dedicated to it. But if you don't have a freezer, and I bring you all the ice cream you've ever asked me for, and you don't have a freezer and the ice cream melts because ice cream did what ice cream does when it's not in the right environment, you do not get to blame the ice cream. You do not. Because you sound silly when you blame the ice cream for melting, when you're the one. Imagine you came home and you're like, silly ice cream didn't jump in the freezer all by itself. What was it thinking? But this is what we do to people. We tried to hire a woman. Remember that time we hired a Black person? It didn't work out. Remember that, because you didn't have the right environment. So I think those things are important. And I want to just quickly add something. I think a lot of the things that Kabir said are so right on. And I want to just give a little bit of caution to some of them, because if you run with some of those just flat out, not like Imperative's doing, you're doing it well, but I caution. So things like the Rooney Rule of making sure that you have inclusive pools is very, very important. It is also important that that these are candidates you would likely hire. If you talk to underrepresented people of color that network into jobs like myself and others, they're full of times that people want to bring me in for the interview and have no intention of hiring me. And it's very clear when that happens. So when you do that, do it like Kabir is doing it. Don't do it like many companies do. I could name names, I will not. That literally reach out to me for jobs. I'm like, I'm absolutely not qualified for this job. And they absolutely want to bring you in for the loop so they can check the box that they brought you in for the loop.
Yep.
Is an absolute we've got to understand. And that networking thing is important. And the reason it's important because when we hire from our networks, it's both arrogance and insecurity that leads us to do this. It's an arrogance that says my network is better than yours and I've totally figured it out. And an insecurity that says I can't articulate my expectations, my vision, the company culture without the true, in the truest sense of the word, handicap that I have to get someone I know. So it's this dual thing that shows up both as arrogance and insecurity.
And for those not familiar with the Rooney Rule, that is in the NFL. You could go read about that. It is around coaching hires and who needs to be interviewed. And it is a hot topic every single year when it comes to hiring season. There's a lot of data out there. And it is an interesting way to springboard into a tough topic at work. Shelmina, I'm going to get to you in just a minute because I saw you nodding your head and you've got another great visual for us. But Aaron, since Amelia and Kabir had mentioned you on this, when we are thinking about, like those are all the we've just talked about some of the internal conversations you need to have with company. When it comes to bias, why do you start with the assumption all the time that you are biased and wrong? And what are the biases that you have that other people might not see as bias, unless of course you were a sports fan?
So that's great. All I can think about right now is ice cream. So I'm kind of like ice cream. That's my answer to everything now. So I haven't had ice cream in a long time, apparently. So I start with just always looking at myself, and I just know the biases I have. I have biases based on where someone's from, like what city in the US, are they rural or are they from a city? I have biases based on education, where someone went to school. My grandfather, who was the original sort of author of the Peace Corps in the Kennedy administration, always was like about people being world class and what it meant to be world class. And he has attributes against that, which the research has now shown do not basically correlate to anything whatsoever in terms of success. So I know all these things are not true, but they're so ingrained in me that I still find them showing up. So I actually have, this is sort of embarrassing to share, but I have, one of my main biases is education, which I know again does not matter, but it's like so ingrained in me. And I find myself when I have a candidate who went to a school that's sort of known as a high caliber school, like I have a confirmation bias. And I look for reasons to support, like, oh, of course, that's because they went to blah, 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 and they're that kind of person, right? So the trick I've actually used for myself is that when I interview people, I just assume, and like, even if it's not true and I know it's not true, I rewrite it and say, everyone went to Stanford. And I put that in my head, and I sort of universally just think of everyone that's being interviewed as a Stanford grad. And I immediately find that I take certain attributes and behaviors and things I see, and I see them through a totally different light when I just assume they went to Stanford. So that's sort of an example where I'm basically trying to hack my own brain to be able to have me behave in a way that's actually rational instead of like using those mechanisms as they are. And also the number one thing that I found was successful was internship program. When I started Imperative in Brooklyn, the company looked like Brooklyn in every way because we started off with interns. Actually, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was an intern at Imperative before she ran for office. Like we had this incredible team and we ended up hiring a lot of those folks in, and it was just such a perfect way to do that. And not everyone's in a position to do it, but that's the far and away like the thing I personally have found most effective in terms of actually moving the dial. So I'll leave it there, and I would just close with ice cream.
Well, let's go back to the ice cream lady really quickly, because this gets to a question that Isabel just put in the chat. I've got about 5-7 more minutes with you panelists. Shelmina, you're on deck, by the way. Amelia, you're up here. When it comes to defining characteristics, so Isabel had asked in the chat, get away from some of this bias in hiring. And you said that it is about defining characteristics of a candidate without describing a person. What does that mean, Amelia?
Well, here's what it means. Many times, I shouldn't say most of the time, many times people say, oh, you know what? I really want someone like Jen. That's what I really want. I want someone like Jen. Well, every day that I wake up and I'm not Jen means I'm a failure. So if you can't articulate to me with words, I want someone who has this level of experience or has the capability to do this or that. Objectively, you're always then looking for and chasing Jen. And I'm likely not going to be the person that shows up and reminds you of Jen or whoever that person is that you already have in your mind's eye. So it's really important to take a step back, think objectively about what you're looking for, and then how that might show up. Does it show up from a specific school, to Erin's point? Does it show up from specific industries? Sometimes people say, well, go get me someone. I want someone from Amazon, or I want someone from this company or that company. You know they have bad employees too, right? I mean, this goes back to what my father says. What do you call the person that, you know, graduated last in their class for medical school? Doctor. So you can't, it's a crutch we rely on because it's a shortcut, but it doesn't yield us the results we're actually looking for. And what then happens is when we don't get that level of diversity in our companies that we're looking for because we're using these trite models, we then say nothing works, we throw up our hands and we walk away and say, well, we tried and we're done.
Yeah, and that is a really powerful way to do that. We've got a couple of other kind of, we'll call them hacks and ways to get around some of that bias in just a minute. Shelmina, I got 2 questions for you, then we're gonna get back to Kabir quickly. Shelmina, I promised the audience that you would give them another visual. You have hired thousands of people in your career. Why is the visual of an iceberg helpful for you in determining, I think, some of the themes that we've talked about, whether it be potential or actual success and understanding the full person?
Yeah, thank you. So it actually ties in really well with what Amelia and Erin just said. So I was responsible for all of IBM servers when Y2K was going to end the world. Some of you might remember that. And so we were hiring in a week more people than we hired in an entire month. And so all of us leaders were trained on something called behavior-based interviewing techniques. This is where you don't look at which school they went to. This is where you hire based on competence. So you define the competence you need, and then you hire accordingly. The thing that we also learned is that a human being is like an iceberg. The top 1/3 is what you see, their experience, their colors, the school they went to, etc. But it's really the bottom 2/3 is what separates the stars from the superstars. If you want to build a high-performing team, you've got to go under what is visible and make it based on competence, not based on anything that is externally visible. And our rate of hiring successfully, which is people that stayed with our company for 5 years, was over 98%, because all of a sudden now we were focused on the competence that this individual brought. But that puts work on you. You have to determine. It's not like I want a Jen. It's not like I want someone from Stanford. You have to determine what competence are you looking for based on the role you want to fill, and then you start peeling the onion. And I'd like to go back to what Amelia talked about, hire on potential, because when you are talking to underrepresented minorities, women, we like to downplay ourselves. We don't like to talk about our successes. And so then you, as the person interviewing, need to peel the onion and find out where were they successful and why were they successful. And if they could do it then, they can do it again. So give them a chance, hire on potential, and make the playing field even so you can get the right talent based on competence, not color, not which university they went to, etc.
You just covered both points brilliantly. And I love that point about underrepresented populations. tend to downplay their tendencies because there's nobody else that looks like them. That is a really key thing to be aware of. So kudos to you, Shelmina, for wrapping that up and putting a little bow on it for me. Kabir, I've got one question for you. Aaron, I've got one more question from you. Then we're gonna get to audience questions. So Kabir, why is it important when we have these conversations? So Shelmina talks about peeling back the onion. Aaron's talking about bias. Why is it important to believe their experience is reality when you are talking to candidates?
You know, it goes back to a lot of what we've talked about in terms of how I think we're hardwired. And what we've found is, I think sometimes, whether you're the hiring manager or you're just involved in an interview process, you tend to bring your own views of the world and your own lens into the conversation. And so it's not uncommon to be in a conversation with folks and they'll say, oh, well, they make a bunch of assumptions about somebody's experience or how they felt a certain way or whatever it might be. And I think it's really important that we have to treat somebody else's experience set as their reality. And if we don't kind of put ourselves in the shoes of their reality, it's really hard to kind of really bring an unbiased view into the process. And so I think that's another area where we're really pushing ourselves and trying to change the way that we think about diversity in general. You know, like sort of a separate point to this, and something I've been thinking a lot about is we're trying to not make this whole idea of diversity something that's in the corner of the organization, right? And Amelia, I think, could maybe share more with us on this because she's got this role. But, you know, one thing that we just, given the whole hog change, I think that we need to do, you know, not just organizationally, but in terms of our entire industry is, you know, you've got folks like Amelia that are in a role that are specific to DE&I. And I think that's at a certain level of scale, you need that. We've taken a little bit of a different tack, which is, well, no, that's just going to be the whole thing, right? So we were really fortunate, actually, on Monday, our head of recruiting starts, and our head of recruiting just happens to be an African-American who happens to care a ton about diversity and inclusion and part of his career, but he doesn't run diversity and inclusion, he runs recruiting, right? And I think it's really important to think about it at the foundational level. I think that'll also help us as we, you know, try to remove these biases from our own processes.
And I think there's also one more thing we can do. Aaron, I'm going to have you wrap up this portion of the conversation. Then I'm going to ask each panelist to go through their key takeaways for the audience. But Aaron, once we get into these conversations and we start reacting to interviews or to resumes that we see, what should we be doing? What do you do if you have a negative reaction to a candidate? There's a checklist, and I'm curious as to what that includes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what you said about the behavioral part of interviewing is like the core of a lot of that. So the first thing I would do is I not only make sure there's like a bunch of people who are interviewing somebody, but we're all doing, a bunch of us are doing it in the room at the same time, so that there's always the ability to like process something and have a second point of view on something versus just interpreting it yourself. I found that to be highly effective. And then being able to actually have everybody truly write down all their notes before we share any of that feedback, because there's a lot that happens where we don't want to share things because it's different than what the manager said, et cetera. I think it's really is critical. And then I personally just don't trust my gut, period. So for me, like that checklist, like I shared the Stanford example, that the piece around potential is really, really important to me, and just sort of saying, am I hiring based on what they've done or what the potential is? And there's a lot of pressure, especially from VCs, to like hire the person who's done exactly this job. You can't invest in people with potential, and really pushing back on that and saying, no, we have to do that. We have to hire people. And we've had tremendous success there. So those are a couple of the pieces. The other thing that just, I think is really powerful is to have people look on the team, look through your LinkedIn network, like scroll through that network and ask them, like, what do you see as trends of like what the people in your network have in common? What are you seeing? And I think has people realize just what their network looks like, and there's good and bad of that, but it's just sort of this like, there's sort of no better visual representation of just sort of realizing the bias in your network, and also where there's, you know, pockets where you can actually add a lot of value to the organization. So those would just be a few things I'd share in closing.
I love that. We're going to ask you to still close it out with your PowerPoint here. We're going to start with Kabir. Here's what I'd like the panelists to do. Spend about 60 seconds just going through that list so we've got some final thoughts. Audience, you are on deck with Q&A. I'm taking a quick look at the time, and it looks like we might go a few minutes over 1 o'clock, so I would encourage you to just hang around there. But again, all of this is being recorded. Kabir, why don't you start us off with your 60-second takeaway?
Takeaway, I'm actually rapidly trying to find my notes and what I told you my takeaway was, so I'm gonna now go fully on the fly. I've appreciated the conversation so much, and I think number one, recognizing, I love the idea of retraining our brains, and Erin, like a lot of what you shared, I think is a really good set of exercises, and I'm totally stealing that. Assume everybody went to Stanford. Which I totally love. I think two, being beyond just training ourselves, being really intentional about it. And three, being metrics driven and being willing to be held accountable is the most important part of driving the change that we all so badly want to see.
I love that. Amelia, you are up. Erin, you're on deck. And Amelia, you are now the ice cream lady, whether you like that or not.
I am.
Forever and ever.
I know. Maybe ice cream is the thing I need to be buying more or less of during COVID. I'm not exactly sure yet. And so you can see the three things that I landed on here. Diversity recruiting is very important, but without the right culture, it's just a sieve. It's just this Sisyphean process of bringing people in and having them fall out. And so focus on it, but it is not the be all end all. And people tend to go there. Like when we have a diversity quote problem, recruiting, it's got to be a bigger part of the organization than just that. And then another thing that I say, now I might be the gym lady and the ice cream lady, which don't really go together, but it's don't just be at the gym in January. Right now, everybody's at the gym. Everybody's talking about race. Everybody's talking about Black Lives Matter. And it's like being at the gym in January. All the equipment is out. Nobody knows how to use it. It's taken a long time. People don't know what they're doing. Be intentional. Be at the gym in July. If you're not going to keep going, get out of the way and get off the equipment, because I got things to do. So I don't really want to be here helping you if you're just intentional to be here in January. I'm really looking to take myself, the people around me, and my organization forward for the long term. And we're going to keep talking about this and doing something about it, ad infinitum, like forever. And don't just say the easy thing, say the right thing, which goes to what Erin said. Don't just look for the short-term win. Sometimes the easy thing of, oh yeah, I know somebody and we can bring them in right away, isn't the right thing. Sometimes saying the right thing means the problem is me. What do I need to do? And then it's not about everybody else.
You gave us more great things to think about. Thank you, Amelia. Erin, you're up.
So just really quickly, Amelia, the combination of the ice cream and the gym reminded me in college. I remember one night I stayed out way too late, but I still wanted to work out in the morning. And I was running on the treadmill. And I was like, maybe I can just close my eyes a little bit while I'm jogging. And sure enough, I went flying off the back. And hit the wall. So anyway, you're right. Certain things don't mix well. Napping and running are not a good mix. Eating ice cream on a treadmill may be better result. But just reminded me of that story. So I guess in closing, I would say, we as human beings are wired to suck at hiring, period. We're tribal, we have all kinds of confirmation bias, we have all kinds of problems. So you gotta first just sort of accept that you are wired to be bad at this. And therefore, you must fundamentally put the systems in place to counterbalance the fact that you're not good at this. And to not have the arrogance to say, I'm gonna be great at this, to actually have the humility to say, like, it's gonna take systems and process to be able to do it. The other thing I would say is like curiosity is like so critical to this whole piece. And what we've seen in our work is that when you actually get people together to have real human conversations on a regular basis, they start to see each other as true human beings. They start to share stories. It starts to build psychological safety. And we are getting rid of meaningful relationships and meaningful conversations in the workplace. And as a result, like a lot of this is going backwards. And the partners we're working with who are actually enabling conversations to happen are starting to change that network dynamic. So just encourage people to like create space for real relationships at work.
Yes, I advocate for that all the time. Yes, thank you for backing me up, Erin. Shelmina, bring it home with your final thoughts.
I love the takeaways from each one of these panelists. I'm so honored to be on this with you. I love your your diversity of thought, and learned so much. So everything here, my 3 takeaways, not a surprise because we all talked about it. Kabir talked about making diversity a core value. Don't make it an initiative. Like Amelia said, don't show up to the gym in January because initiatives come and go based on what's important at that time. So if you make it an initiative, you are not going to change long-term. So make it a core value. Show it that it's your core value. Show it in your senior leadership team. Show it in the videos you put out. Show it everywhere. Make it real. Make it part of your organization, the heartbeat of your organization, not just something you do. It's who you are. It's what you stand for. And then secondly, as all of us business people know, that if you don't measure something, you're not going to improve. And you can't just measure it at one level, because if you look at the leaky pipeline, which is what I'm focused on, we do hire, as Amelia says, but then we don't surround them with a culture, with the mentors, with the sponsors, with the help they need. And so then they fall off. So it needs to be measured at every level. And I'm a huge believer, whether people say it or not, remuneration drives behavior, especially when something needs to be changed. Otherwise, you go back to your confirmation biases, you go back to doing whatever is comfortable and whatever you've done. So initially, while you're changing until it becomes the DNA of your organization, you will have to publicly reward the behavior you're looking for. Stand them up in your big sales meetings, have the CEO talk about it, make it a conversation that gets people to recognize that I'm going to be positively rewarded, and reinforce that behavior as something that we want to make part of our DNA until it becomes part of our DNA. We must do all this, otherwise we're going to be having the same conversation when my daughter is sitting at this chair, and that would not be good.
And speaking of that conversation, let's switch it up now with some questions. David, I know that you have been monitoring them coming in. I also know that folks are going to need to stick around with us for just a little bit longer to get these answered, but I think we can probably do that.
Yeah, as I always like to do as a courtesy, if it looks like we're going to run over, if all our panelists are okay with going maybe 5 or 10 minutes over, we will try to get to as many of your questions as possible. And I see nodding heads. So we're going to go ahead and first question I have comes in from Liz. Liz asked the question, and I think this question's for Shelmina. How do I get a view into the 2/3 of the iceberg that I can't see during a 60-minute interview?
Yeah, you know what? This is a great question, and it's a difficult question. You just can't zoom into the competence you're looking for. And then you start getting to know the individual as a person, the behavior that they have exhibited in the past. And you keep peeling the onion. Instead of asking 59 different questions, ask 10 questions that just keeps digging deeper and deeper and deeper until you go to the bottom of the iceberg and you start seeing the individual, their values, their motives, what do they stand for, etc. And there's a lot of, if you just type behavior-based interviewing techniques on Google, you will see a lot of this information so you can prepare how to do this right.
I will also add to that, I actually teach corporate training on how to ask better questions, because this is what I do for a living, and there's a strategy behind how you formulate very specific questions to get great stories. So I can also be a resource there as well. David, what's our next question?
The next question comes from Shruti. And Shruti writes, made the statement and then asks the question. I am that classmate from India, and it irritates me sometimes. They are wondering how these ideas and thought processes trickle down into the university and then into careers of being, if you forgive the vernacular, the token friend.
Okay, so I see Amelia just unmuted herself on that one. Amelia, why don't you take this one?
Well, I think part of it is understanding when you want to call it out and when you don't. Like, you don't have to take on the emotional burden of being somebody's fill in the blank friend. Like, I'm not doing that. In the immediacy after George Floyd's murder, lots of people reaching out, college roommates, all sorts of people. Listen, I'm not texting you or calling you back. I don't actually care. Like, I'm not invested in your learning. That sounds cold, but I'm not. If you're texting me from college and I'm still the only Black person this is not a thing that's going to happen in my life. So it's really around, but also for people that I do care about, what is the challenge? What's a way that we can bring truth to that conversation? When someone comes to me and says, oh, I want to tell you about this great movie that I saw, and I think to myself, you've never told me about another movie in your life, so I guarantee you this movie contained Black people, right? It's calling it out and saying, is there a particular reason you want to tell me about this movie? Did you not see another great movie in the last 5 years I've known you that you wanted to tell me about? It starts at a person, but I think as a person, you have to then think about how much you want to engage in that process. The question also asks about systemic institutional racism. Like, how do you bring this to universities and workplaces and things like that? You have to stop rewarding racism. We live in a country that rewards racism. It rewards sexism. So you have to think about the rewards that are attached to those things and bulldoze the heck out of them. Mm-hmm. That's what you have to do. Like, there is no other way around it. You have to face it full on. There is no diet pill that you can order off TV at 3 a.m. that's going to work for racism. Yep. We've been dealing with this since 1619. You want to eliminate it overnight? No.
And I think you've got to also, as a minority, and be into the question, sort of being like that friend from India, I think you've got to make, and I think Amelia's push here is great, you've got to make some decisions, I think, yourself around your own values around this. And I can share for me, and this is purely a personal belief, I think that we're operating, so context, I think we're operating on a really big spectrum. And I won't maybe detail every point of that spectrum. I'll detail a couple of ends of it in my own experience. The one is the shared experience we're all having right now, which is the awareness of systemic racism and how it's built into our society, which none of us would be in this webinar if we didn't, or attending this webinar if we didn't believe that and care about that. I want to fix that. So that's sort of, there's this one end of the spectrum that we know has to get fixed because it's systemic. There's another end, at least in my own experience, my family moved. My parents were born and brought up in India and immigrated here. I was born in America, and I spent most of my childhood in Kansas City, Kansas. And when I was in 8th grade, my family moved to the Seattle area, for those of you that are watching from Seattle. And you might have heard Seattle referred to as like the Seattle bubble, right? We think like everything's great and we're diverse, and we are all going through this like, oh my God, there's all this systemic racism we didn't realize, especially those of us that spent a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest. In Kansas City as a kid, being Indian was weird. Like, it was like you were weird because you weren't white. It was this shocking experience for me going from Kansas to Seattle, where being Indian was cool. And I don't know if it was the age, like 8th, 9th grade, kids are more, curious. I don't think it was that. I think it was the culture in the Seattle area, which was so different, which people were like, oh, I want to know about your culture. I want to know about the food that you eat at home. I want to know about the traditional ethnic wear that you have. Like, it was just a different, and it was like, as a kid, like this totally different experience that I think has really shaped who I am today. And I would say what I've carried forward into my life as an adult is I try to put myself in situations proactively where everybody else is white. And it's uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable. I'm intentional about it from everywhere, from where I live to some of the social settings that I find myself in. And I think there's a responsibility that I've just made a decision and my family's made a decision, which says, hey, we're going to lean into those uncomfortable environments and situations, because we also have to make the learning opportunity and the awareness of different cultures available. And I think one of the greatest things that's happening right now is in large part, of course, this isn't the case, unanimously across our society, unfortunately, but I would say in large part, white Americans are leaning in and trying to learn, at least the ones that I have the opportunity to work with and spend time with. And I think that is a great step forward in this conversation. And I think, using, if you are finding yourself as the only minority in these situations and environments, I think it's a great opportunity to kind of share and help people on that learning journey.
Thanks for sharing that story, Kabir.
Wow.
Do we have any more questions?
We do. We have more. Eric has asked the question, beyond intentional change in terms of supported culture and hiring, he's curious in what some of the panelists are doing to interact with underrepresented groups within their communities, such as recruiting regionally, reaching out at Black colleges and universities, doing career fairs, hosting women in tech, etc.
Aaron, I'm going to have you unmute.
So, yeah. I'd say not enough in general. I think we're doing some work around with the Bureau of Manhattan Community College, just trying to support faculty and students in programs by providing free access to our product. So that's one way that we've been trying to really work with institutions that we weren't working with before, and seeing early positive results from that. But I don't think it's an area where I would say I'm the person to answer this question, to be honest with you.
Shelmina, I know that you do a lot of work with women and making sure that you're empowering the next generation of girls. How have you made sure that you're reaching diverse groups of women and girls in that endeavor?
Yeah, so basically I have dedicated the next chapter of my career to do this. I believe so strongly, not just in the business case for diversity, but also because I just look at the numbers. I look at the leaky pipeline of senior leadership, and that curdles my blood. And having faced all kinds of odds, all kinds of challenges, rose up to be a senior executive, and I know a thing or two about how that happens. So I go and I speak to conferences, to women in tech, to colleges. I speak globally, and my thing is we have a leaky pipeline. It's not just about hiring, right? It's about women also taking ownership, as Amelia talked about the ice cream, and we as ice cream should be screaming, "Put me in the freezer," right? And so women, you will see, Kay Shipman says that women will only apply for a job when they have 80% of the skills necessary. Men will do it when they have 20%. So women also need to take this ownership. And so I want to educate women, and I want them to recognize that, hey, listen, don't let someone else define your success for you, and don't just go for jobs where you know you can do this, because you will never build self-trust if you do that, if you just stay comfortable. And so I go to communities, colleges where there is predominantly minority folks, to make them aware that you've got to take chances on yourself, because the world takes you at your own estimate. If you just sit there quietly waiting for someone to tap you on your shoulder, it's not going to work. So I find them everywhere, and I'm intentional about it. I am proactive. I seek these opportunities to go speak, and while I'll hire, I'll charge corporations and large conferences thousands of dollars, I'll go speak to these women for free. I'll even pay my own travel and living expenses, because I have to cast my net wider, and we all have to get in this game and work at it from both sides. It's going to take both sides, the corporations and the women. And so let's educate the women. Let's make them comfortable talking about what they have accomplished and their strengths. And let's educate the corporations to also hire on potential. And based on what I have done, it's been so successful that I'm actually now writing a book. I want everyone to have these insights. So yeah, I'm going everywhere in the world to take my message and to change that statistic.
Fantastic. And this phrase, if you stay comfortable, you won't build self-trust, I think is very helpful when having this conversation. So thank you for that one, Shelmina.
Yeah, Jen, I know we're really bumping on time. We have two great questions. We actually have more than that, but we have two really good questions. And maybe if we can just get one or two people, maybe just 30 seconds on them.
So
The
we'll
first
do
question.
rapid fire with this, which is
Yeah,
1 minute
exactly.
task. So
Yeah.
let's do rapid fire here.
So the first one is from Jackie. Their question is there a danger in continuing to hire for quote unquote cultural fit? I think is a great question.
Okay. So Amelia, I see you. Noka, well.
Listen, if you hire for cultural fit in the year of our Lord 2020, you're going to die. Stop doing it. If you don't hire to add to your culture, just stop. You've got to add and expand your culture, or else you're just hiring for sameness, but stating that you want diversity and being utterly confused by it, why it won't find you. Stop.
And there you go.
Done.
Done. Shelmina gives it 2 thumbs up. Done. Drop that mic, Amelia. David, what's our last one?
All right, our last question. Gail asked this question about employee referrals, and I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it. What could be done to make employee referrals more diverse and to drive more diversity out of those programs? And I think that ties into a lot of the prior conversation that we had.
Okay, so I'm giving everybody, this will be it. I'm going to go around the horn here. Kabir, you're going to start, and I want like 2 sentences on this. So I'm buying you a little time to condense your thoughts here. Kabir, you're leaning back. I need you to lean in. You ready?
Yeah, the quick version is I'm not a fan of incentivizing referrals. It has to be part of your values. And so the right referrals will come if you do the hard work to make diversity part of your core values.
Awesome. Aaron, follow that up.
Agree with that. And then I would also say, I think shining a spotlight publicly on sort of everyone in the organization in different ways to encourage them to then share that out with the community. So give them a reason. So when at the Taproot Foundation, one of our executives was one of the first people to get married, the gay marriage in San Francisco. We gave everyone the day off permanently. Like that was going to be Matt O'Grady Day. Everybody has that day off. And the organization like totally transformed from like that one thing.
All right, Shelmina, I saw you nodding your head. I want you to add to this, and then Amelia's going to bring it home.
Positively reinforce that behavior publicly, whether you reward them for hiring a diverse candidate or you just stand them up, give them financial incentive, whatever. Let everyone know that this is the behavior we want more of.
Amelia, wrap it up.
Well, all of your referrals or most of your referrals are coming from, in this case, maybe cisgendered white men, I'm using that as an example, and people of color aren't giving you their recommendations, you got a problem. That's where to put the thermometer. If they're not telling people about your great company, they don't think it's great. They don't like it, and they wouldn't have any of their friends work here. Also, people of color aren't the only people who should know other people of color. So it's also this idea of, oh, we want someone Black in the organization. Go ask Amelia about her network. Okay. First, I don't just know Black people. I'm not only related to Black people. Secondly, I know lots of other people, and we should have the same expectation for everyone else's network. So it's a great way to measure how inclusive our culture really is when we look at who gets referred into the culture as well.
I love that. And I love this as a stopping point for our conversation today. Panelists, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to get a chance to work with you.
The webinar will be available for on-demand replay later this week. We'll also be sending all registered attendees an email with the link. You can stay tuned for the next TalentReach hosted webinar that'll be coming this fall. With COVID continuing, like all of you, we hope to enter new phases. Please wear a mask, please. And look forward to doing this in person in the future. And this concludes our webinar. Thank you once again, everybody, for joining us.